I moved here about 18 years ago. Thank you. From Colombia. And yeah, one of the challenges that we have with English as a second language, well, is English as a second language. And some of the struggles that I had at the beginning, I had this date with this lady. It was at 7, Wendy and I called to confirm. Her husband answers the phone and I say, yes, sir, I have a date with Wendy at 7. And he's like, puts the phone down, honey, and I can hear him talking in the background. They're like, yeah, 7 is fine. And I was like, okay, then he hanged up. I'm like, well, that was rude. And the host mother who was where I was staying, she's like, oh, you have a date today? She's like, yeah, I'm gonna go fix this guy's computer. And he was really rude, like, oh, so you have an appointment. And those are some of the simple things that we have. Now, Blake, how do you pronounce that? Who? So I go to the drive-thru at this restaurant and I order a Hooper. And the lady on the phone like, you want a what? Like a Hooper, no onions. Sorry, sir, what do you want? Just give me chicken nuggets. And I went, talked to my friends, and they're like, oh, you wanted a Whopper. Like, how do you go from who to why in this word? It didn't make sense to me. In Spanish, we have all these, tildes and ñes and things like, cálculo, calculo, y calculó. You spell it the same just because you put the accent in different places. It means different things. So I got home this day. I know this is not whiskey and Wi-Fi, but that helps me calm down. So I go home, and I was telling Kathy, my host mother, that, Mike had got me a pickup. And I said, like, Mike bought you a pickup? She's like, yeah, you want to see it? Like, okay. And she's like, oh, he wants you a pickup truck. Like, yes. Those sounds, to me, kind of sound the same. And Mike, Captain Howe, he used to fly for Flying Tigers, and when he retired, he bought his mother-in-law's mowers and blowers business. And of course, in Colombia, I grew up in a coffee farm, and I used to carry around a machete, not a lawnmower, but I started learning terminology and getting familiar with this stuff. And I noticed at the store, people brought these lawnmowers full of grass and mud and leaves. And I say, hey, Mike, we have this big air compressor and hoses. Why don't we advertise and tell everybody that with a tune-up or with any repair, we'll give him, we'll just blow all the dust and everything out of it, and we'll give everybody a free blow job. And he said, Ferney, that's a terrible idea. And I said, but why? He's like, stop. And after a very short and very explicit explanation, I agreed. That would have been a really bad idea to offer that. Now, a lot of things get lost in translation. In Utah, there's this theme park called Lagoon. So there's a steel factory. They had a large number of Spanish-speaking employees. So they used to have a weekly newsletter, and one of the weeks they had a family week, and they were giving free passes, for people, to bring the kids to Lagoon. And then they decided to do a translation themselves and put it in Spanish. And there were a couple of guys walking around just cracking up, saying, "No manches, güey, lleva tus cabroncitos al lago." And the guy was like, "What do you say? What do you say?" Well, in Spanish, they translated like, "Bring your baby goats to the lake." And of course, that didn't make sense for them, but a lot of those things get lost in translation. And it's not just the language, it's the culture itself that we struggle with. So being from Colombia, I come to the US in Utah, and yes, there is a lot of snow there in the winter. So I bought me these snowshoes, good spikes, and said they will be great in the snow and the ice. And I tried them, they were not that good. I said, maybe I'll just keep them and give them to my uncle. He still lives in the farm and it will work. And then once at work, this group was gonna take us to a sports event and say, why is everybody wearing snowshoes if there's no snow outside? And I was like, oh, that's what these are for. Those were no snowshoes. And in Colombia, we make something called arepas. And in one of my trips from Colombia, I am in front of a United States Customs and Border Patrol officer. And he's like, for how long were you in Colombia, sir? It's like, a week, sir. Did you buy any food? He's like, yes, sir. I bought some coffee, and I bought some candy, and 4 kilos of, we have, we make arepas. You make what, sir? It's like corn patties. It's like tortillas, but corn patties, and it's made with this white powder. And he's like, okay, you're coming from Colombia with 4 kilos of white powder, sir. We're gonna have to check your bags. It's like, I understand, officer. My mind went blank and I totally forgot the word for flour. But sometimes we have to come up with some. And then we get to Wi-Fi, or Wi-Fi, or Sunfield, or Drahtlos, whatever you call it. The speed of light moves at the same speed everywhere, and it's the same thing. We just call it different things. And then we get our German friends that, they say, oh yeah, we have a problem with the VLAN. It's like, oh, you mean hybrid ports? You're not tagging them everywhere, the uplinks, you have link. No, the VLANs. Like, oh, the WLAN. No, the VLAN. And you're like, oh, okay, that's confusing. But those are things that we come across in the world. And then we have, when I start explaining, things to some of the clients, attenuation areas, brick, and then, shade rock, and they're like, wait, excuse me, sir, what kind of rock? And I'm like, drywall? Like, oh, yeah, drywall. So, and I was, after a validation survey, I was explaining to this lady, that we needed to focus on the back of the gym, and I saw her wide open. I was like, I knew I was saying something wrong. And I did not even ask for a sheet of paper because I would have made things worse. So I grab a piece of paper and I say like, see, focus. And like, oh, focus. So we can get in trouble. And sometimes, in this community, we have people from all over the world. We have people from Guam in here, from South Africa, you mentioned it. And our languages sometimes becomes a barrier. And we may sound rude and we may sound uneducated. And then one of the days I was at a client side, a CPA firm. There are always numbers and stuff. And then he tells me, yeah, there's this area, there's no Wi-Fi there. And then I go there and automatically say, oh, you got NEC 50 here. I say, see, I told you. NEC 50, right? That's bad, right? Like, and I just stop for a second and say, like, you know what? Wi-Fi is just like another language. And we just assume that people talk about it. And like last year, Matthew, he's really fluent, the guy that helped you with registration and stuff, he's really fluent in Wi-Fi. And he knows terms like you need to pay your invoice or you're not getting a bag and things like that. So we were at the conference in Budapest last year, and one of the attendees, he assumes wireless LAN professionals, Matthew, yeah, of course, like, so Matthew, what are we doing with this Raspberry Pi? And he looks at me like, are we giving some sort of pies? Like, no, tell him this is an Odroid. So he turns around like, oh yeah, no, that's an Odroid. And then tell him we're gonna use that like, like an endpoint. Yeah, and we're gonna use that as an endpoint. And we're gonna use it as an iPerf server. Yeah, and we're gonna use that as a perf server, a perverse server. A what server? Like, okay. That's one of the examples that we have in Wi-Fi. It's another language, and we talk it, we speak it, in normal terms, but for others, it's just totally different. So yes, if we are wireless professionals and you already speak wireless, now we have to work on the professional part. And yes, being a professional is not that hard. You just have to educate yourself like one, dress like one, treat others like one, and do your work like one. Education, we had 70 people in this crowd that they dedicated the whole weekend to education. And it's not just about getting training. It's about teaching others. I don't know how many hours Mr. Parsons has spent patiently teaching me. And yeah, Andrew, I don't forget the time when you sat down and gave me a first push on Twitter. That's teaching. It's not only learning, but teaching. And we take teaching seriously, wireless LAN professional, and we make it a personal experience. We enjoy learning, and this is a family. A lot of newcomers here, first-timers, this is the community to be and learn and share. So with this, just keep in mind, if you already find Wi-Fi, education is really important, and it doesn't matter if you have a PhD or multiple master's degrees, or if you have multiple bachelor's degrees, or whatever certifications you have, treating and respecting others is one of the important things. Merci beaucoup.